In the rotting carcass of an industrial city, humanity suffers a grotesque affliction. Blood hardens into glass, and veins toll like brittle bells when they fracture. Those who collapse do not bleed, they shatter, their bodies unraveling into shards of crystal that chime a mournful hymn as they scatter. But beneath the city's foundations, buried deeper than steel and stone, something older still awakens. A creature whose heart beats in living things. Now, Marcus Hale, a maintenance engineer in the industrial sector, had long grown accustomed to the stench of burning oil and the groan of failing machines. But lately, a new sound haunted the air. A faint, chilling chime, like glass splintering in the wind. The first time he heard it was in the old foundry, where his longtime co-worker Joseph suddenly crumpled mid-shift. Joseph's body convulsed, his skin pale and drenched in sweat. Rushing to help, Marcus felt it through the man's soaked shirt. Veins stiff as wire, vibrating under his touch. A pale blue glow traced along Joseph's neck, translucent and glimmering like crystal. "Help me," Joseph rasped. Then came the crack. His arm bent unnaturally, snapping not like bone, but like brittle glass. Marcus staggered back, horrified, as Joseph's body fissured, splinter by splinter. No blood flowed, only a crystalline sheen spreading through his flesh. Within seconds, his friend disintegrated into 1,000 shards, scattering across the floor in a ringing cascade like a funeral bell. The other workers fled, their screams ricocheting down the iron hallways. But Marcus remained frozen, staring at the jagged remnants of a man who had once laughed beside him over late-night shifts. No breath, no blood, only silence, and the terrible hymn of glass breaking. In the days that followed, the city descended into quiet chaos. Whispers spread like wildfire of those who walked with chiming veins,
We have to get out
who
of here.
fell and shattered into nothing. Officials denied everything. Newspapers ran blank, but the streets emptied after dusk. Doors were bolted, windows veiled, and eyes averted as if the sickness could spread through a glance. Marcus could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the sound returned. Joseph's collapse echoing in his chest, shards ringing in his skull. Worse still, on sleepless nights, when the wind whistled through the rusted vents atop the factories, he heard something deeper. A rhythm, a strange melody, reverberating from far beneath the earth. A thought rooted itself within him, unwelcome but unshakable. Joseph's death was no accident, and the plague was no natural disease. Something was hidden below the city, older and more terrible than rust or stone. And Marcus knew if he did not uncover it, his own veins would soon toll like glass bells. Nananiao, tea. The city hospital reeked of disinfectant, yet beneath the acrid sting lingered something colder. The faint tang of rust, mingled with the dust of ground glass. Marcus had come to claim Joseph's body, but the morgue lay barren. The record was blunt, patient fractured, no remains preserved. In the silent corridor, a voice broke the stillness. "You lost someone too, in the shattering?" He turned to find a gaunt woman in a white coat. Her eyes, ringed with sleepless shadows, burned with an intensity that unsettled more than comforted. She introduced herself, Dr. Iris Ward, resident physician. Without waiting for reply, she tugged him into a cramped laboratory where yellow light flickered over rows of vials. Inside the glass, blood was no longer blood. In one vial, Liquid once red had grown translucent, flecked with jagged shards that caught the light like splinters of ice. Iris raised it carefully. "This isn't coagulation," she whispered. "It's restructuring. Blood turning into something akin to silica. No virus, no bacteria, as if the human body is learning to become something else." Marcus' skin crawled. The faint chime returned in his skull, echoing like a memory of breaking. Then the sound grew louder. From the ward next door erupted a chorus of clattering bells. They rushed into chaos. 5 patients screamed at once, bodies convulsing, veins glowing like molten glass beneath their skin. Then came the fractures, sharp, merciless, deafening. In an instant, their forms burst apart, crystalline shards cascading through the air, painting the corridor in a rain of glittering death. Noses scattered, windows shattered. Iris stood paralyzed, but Marcus dragged her back, shielding her from the storm of fragments. When at last the ringing dimmed, only a sparkling dust coated the floor, shimmering like frost beneath the lights. Iris's breath trembled. "This can't be illness. It spreads another way, and I think the source lies beneath the sewer veins, where the old bedrock cuts through the city." Marcus glanced down at his own hand. A shallow cut still seeped red from the shards, but in the dim glow he caught a glint of translucence threading through the blood. His pulse thundered. The city was becoming an instrument for something vast and unseen. And if he and Iris failed to uncover it, every heartbeat would toll like glass bells until nothing remained but a symphony of ruin. Nawa. Rain slicked the city that night, turning the streets into broken mirrors beneath jaundiced lamps. Marcus and Iris followed a faded address buried in the patient files. Samuel Kerr, a sewer worker, the sole survivor of an accident that had reduced his crew to glass dust. They found him in a damp boarding room at the city's edge. Samuel was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, fingers twitching as though keeping time to an unheard rhythm. When Marcus introduced himself, Samuel only laughed. A rasping, stony sound. "You hear it too, don't you? That ringing, it never leaves." His voice dropped to a whisper as Iris pressed him about the day of the accident. Samuel told of drilling into an unfamiliar vein of rock deep beneath the tunnels. From it spilled a cold blue glow, and then the singing began. Not human, not words, just the crystalline resonance of glass upon glass. His fellow workers froze, eyes hollow, until one by one they shattered. Samuel alone had fled, but ever since the song gnawed at his skull, louder with every night. As he spoke, Marcus caught it too. A faint tapping from beneath the warped floorboards, measured, relentless. Samuel grinned, pointing downward. "It's singing for us, even here." The 3 descended into the sewers. The air reeked of damp stone and something sharper, the dry bite of powdered glass. Their flashlights carved tunnels of light across the walls, where veins of crystal jutted from the rock like arteries of frozen fire. Each step sent echoes bouncing through the dark, and from the depths came an answering chord, as if unseen hands were plucking strings woven from bone. Samuel buckled, clutching his skull, muttering prayers that melted into melody. Iris clung to Marcus, her voice barely a breath. "It doesn't just kill, it's turning them into part of the song." Marcus stared into the blackness where the music swelled clearer, vibrating through stone and marrow alike. The chill in his bones told him they had crossed into something's domain, something not of flesh, not of man. And the symphony of glass was only beginning. Indeed. The deeper they ventured into the mine, the more the world above seemed like a forgotten dream. The walls glistened with moisture, streaked with veins of black ore that pulsed faintly, as though the rock itself had a heartbeat. The narrow passageways twisted endlessly, sometimes collapsing into suffocating tunnels, other times widening into caverns where the silence felt almost alive. Mark's lantern trembled in his grip, the flame quivering as if it feared what lay ahead. Shadows bent unnaturally along the jagged stone, stretching and contorting into forms that did not belong to the human world. Evelyn trailed her fingers along the damp wall, her breath shallow. She could feel something, an unseen rhythm, guiding her deeper, luring her forward with the persistence of a whispered command. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. A stench rose, iron, rot, and something far older. The ground beneath them was littered with scraps of rusted tools, helmets split down the middle, skeletal remains half buried in shale. Time had not eroded the violence etched into those bones. Some still bore the marks of desperate clawing, as if the miners had tried to tear through the earth itself in their final moments. Then came the sound. A low murmur at first, indistinct, like wind brushing against the stone. But it grew. Layer upon layer of voices, men, women, children, rising in a chorus too vast to belong to the living. They spoke in a tongue neither Evelyn nor Mark could comprehend, yet the meaning slithered through their minds, bypassing reason. Surrender. Become. Join us. Mark pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices only grew louder, drilling straight into his skull. Evelyn, however, stood transfixed, her eyes glazed, her lips parting as if to echo the chant. Her lantern light flickered, nearly extinguished, and in the dim glow, the walls began to move. Faces, countless, twisted, agonized, pressed outward from the rock, their mouths opening and closing in unison with the voices. The descent had ceased to be a path. It was no longer a mine but a threshold, and whatever awaited below was not content to remain buried. Da! The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The air churned, thick and suffocating, as if the mine itself had begun to breathe. In the center lay a pit, a wound in the earth, glowing faintly with a light that was not fire, but something raw, primordial. The voices rose from it, a deafening storm of whispers that battered the walls and rattled the bones of the dead. Evelyn stumbled forward, drawn to the edge, her eyes reflecting the pit's glow. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her back with all his strength, but she resisted, her face slack and unrecognizable, as though something else had claimed her. The ground quaked beneath them, shards of stone falling like teeth from the ceiling. From within the pit, a shape stirred. At first, it was only a suggestion, a ripple in the glow, a distortion of space, but then it began to take form. Vast limbs, slick with black ichor, reached upward, and a face, eyeless yet seeing, pressed against the veil that separated earth from the void. Its mouth opened, and the chamber filled with a sound that was not a roar, but the breaking of worlds. Mark's lantern shattered. Darkness swallowed them, save for the pit's sickly glow. He dragged Evelyn away, her feet dragging. Her voice now a chorus that matched the whispers. She screamed words not her own, each syllable striking him like a blade. The chamber tilted, reality itself buckling under the weight of what clawed its way free. They ran through collapsing tunnels, past walls that bled shadows, past bones that reached out with grasping fingers. Behind them, the pit widened, its glow spilling through the mine like veins of fire. The voices swelled to a crescendo, drowning out thought, drowning out fear, until all that remained was surrender. At the final passage, Mark forced Evelyn ahead of him, shoving her through the narrow gap. He turned back once, just long enough to see the rising form fill the chamber, its countless mouths opening in unison. His scream joined theirs as the earth swallowed him whole. Above ground, Evelyn collapsed on the barren soil. The mine sealed itself with a thunderous roar, leaving only silence in its wake. But in her chest, the whispers lived on, soft, steady, patient. The awakening had begun. Ow. In the small town of Vermont, winter smothers every street beneath a suffocating veil of snow, yet its silence conceals an ancient dread. They whisper that if, at midnight, one hears the faint clatter of grinding teeth within the walls, then by dawn someone will be found lifeless, face frozen, lips stretched wide into a grotesque smile. No blood, no wound, only an emptiness too terrifying to name. They call it the Mark of Labubu, the final smile from which no soul has ever escaped. Endi, Wendili, Endau, Einhau, Amdi, Capstay. Winter in Vermont draped the land in a blinding pall of white, drowning the town in a silence so deep it seemed frozen in place. On that morning, with frost still clinging to the windowsills, they discovered the body of Mrs. Helen Morris in her weathered wooden house at the edge of town. The door had been left unlocked. Nothing inside was disturbed. The fireplace still glowed faintly with dying embers, and a teacup rested beside the armchair, its contents long since gone cold. Yet what made the blood run cold was not the tranquility of the scene, but her face. Helen's lips had been pulled so wide they seemed to split her countenance, twisted into a grotesque smile, as if forced open by an unseen hand. The corners of her mouth were torn, yet no blood marked the wound. Her eyes stared upward, glassy and vacant, fixed on an eternity no one else could see. Her body remained intact, without the faintest trace of struggle, a statue of flesh arranged to grin forever. The neighbor later recalled that the night before her death, Helen had complained of strange noises in the wooden walls. Like teeth gnashing, she whispered, but no one paid attention. Now, within the house, as neighbors gathered in uneasy silence, some swore they could still hear that faint, clattering sound seeping from the cracks in the ceiling. The town sheriff quickly dismissed it as an unusual death caused by stroke. None dared to argue, yet those who had looked upon Helen's face could not bear to look again. The photograph of her body was hidden away almost immediately, for even a single glimpse was enough to make one's stomach knot with dread. By the following day, word had spread across town. Some whispered of the old curse, handed down through generations. When the hollow smile appears, the soul has already been taken. Others clung desperately to reason, murmuring of rare illnesses or mass hysteria. But in the nights that followed, when the wind died and the silence deepened, families began to hear it. The faint grinding of unseen teeth inside their walls. And all who heard it thought of Helen's face, her endless smile, and the eyes that seemed still to follow the living with a hollow, eternal gaze. Oh, Anvi. The death of Helen Morris had not yet faded from memory when the town was struck by another shock. Only a week later, the familiar grocer, Richard Palmer, was found lifeless behind his counter. He sat slumped in his swivel chair, one hand resting upon his ledger. No signs of struggle, not a trace of blood, only that same twisted visage, lips stretched into a brittle, unnatural smile.
I can't stay here.
Drawn so taut it seemed the skin might
either.
tear apart. The whispers grew louder. Some still muttered of coincidence, but disbelief crumbled when, inside the local schoolhouse, a teacher was discovered collapsed at her desk. She too sat upright, eyes frozen open, her face marked by that grotesque grin. 3 deaths, each body untouched, each face smiling. No one could cling to reason any longer. Unease thickened over the town like a second winter. With every nightfall, the people listened to their walls, holding their breath against the faintest disturbance, dreading the sound of something stirring where no living thing should be. In this oppressive silence, Eleanor Finch, a widow in her 40s, began to notice strange occurrences within her own home. At first, it was only faint clicks within the walls, like metal striking metal. She dismissed it as vermin or the sigh of old pipes. But her son, Daniel, whispered that he heard something more. Laughter, low and disembodied, drifting through his room each night. Sleep deserted her. Eleanor began recording every detail in a small notebook. The time the noises began, the place from which they seemed to echo, the unnatural chill that seeped through cracks in the wooden walls. And with every page, a dreadful realization grew clearer. Each victim had spoken of such sounds days before their deaths. The home that once promised safety now became a silent snare. In the late hours, Eleanor sat rigid in the dark, listening to the dry, relentless grinding of teeth moving through the walls, as though some colossal maw waited patiently to swallow her family whole. And she understood then. The hollow smile was no longer just the misfortune of neighbors. It was advancing, step by step, click by click, toward her very own door. Ni, Anho. Eleanor sought answers in a place long abandoned by most, the old library at the center of town. Its halls were silent, but for the creak of ancient wood, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and the dust that lay thick upon every shelf. As she sifted through crumbling records, her hands brushed against a small volume bound in darkened leather, a forgotten journal belonging to a minister of the 18th century. The yellowed pages chronicled a time of horror. The town had once endured a mysterious plague of smiles. People collapsed in droves, their bodies untouched, their faces frozen in hollow grins. The minister wrote that it was no illness, but rather the work of a thing awakened from the earth. He named it the bringer of smiles, a gaunt silhouette, whose endless teeth ground together in the night. Eleanor closed the book, her heart pounding. She realized she had stumbled upon a secret the town had chosen to bury. Yet, a deeper fear gnawed within her. If the curse had risen once, then it could rise again. That night, the dreams began. She saw her own familiar room drowned in darkness, and in the corner stood a figure, thin, motionless, its face blurred save for the gaping grin carved across it, wide enough to split its head in two. From that smile came the grinding of unseen teeth, a constant, merciless rattle that filled the air. She woke drenched in cold sweat, only to hear the same dry clatter seeping from the walls, as though the dream had followed her into waking life. Daniel, too, began to change. The boy grew pale and hollow-eyed, restless with sleepless nights. One morning, Eleanor froze in terror as she found her son smiling in his sleep. It was no expression of innocence, but a rigid, grotesque imitation of the dead. When she called his name, he gave no answer, only the faint, unconscious gnash of teeth echoing through the room. Horror welled up within her, and yet she understood. This was no accident, no coincidence. The smile was a mark, a sign that her child had been touched by something no human eye could meet. And in the silence of that house, as the beams groaned beneath an unseen weight, Eleanor grasped the truth. The others had only been the beginning. The curse had returned, and now it was reaching for her family. Kelly. In the days after discovering the ancient journal, Eleanor lived in a state of unbearable strain. By day, the town slumbered beneath a veil of quiet snow. But when night descended, her house became a hollow chamber, echoing with dreadful sounds. At first, it was only a few scattered clicks from the wooden panels. Yet with each passing night, the noises multiplied, spreading through the halls, along the ceilings, into the bedrooms. They were not the creaks of timber, but the slow, grinding rasp of teeth. Thousands of them, clenching and scraping together, each movement drawn out as if to torment the nerves of anyone who dared to listen. Eleanor soon noticed strange fissures creeping across the walls. They did not split like ordinary cracks. Instead, they curved into arcs, bending like hidden rows of teeth embedded deep in the wood. She struck them with a hammer, desperate to break the illusion. But each time she did, new fissures appeared elsewhere, even along the ceiling, as though the house itself was sprouting a jaw of its own. Daniel was withering. He no longer ate, no longer spoke, but sat for hours unmoving, his eyes dulled and opaque. One night, Eleanor entered his room and found him seated stiffly on the bed, eyes wide but empty. His face had contorted, lips stretching into an unnaturally long smile. When she touched his shoulder, a sound erupted from his mouth, the hideous gnash of teeth grinding together, inhuman, resonant, and cold. Eleanor wept, clutching her son to her chest. But when she lifted her gaze, she froze. On the wall behind him, a shadow had taken form, gaunt, elongated, its head cocked to one side, as though sharing in Daniel's smile. Its mouth gaped open, revealing jagged rows of teeth, clattering in rhythm with the sound spilling from her child. The room grew icy, her breath clouding the air in pale wisps. She staggered backward, trembling, but the shadow did not fade. It only stood, tilting its head, its grin endless and hollow. Every candle in the house sputtered out at once, plunging the room into a suffocating black. From within that dark, the gnashing rose, layer upon layer, until it seemed the entire house had become a single vast mouth, waiting to swallow them whole. When the lights flared back, Daniel collapsed onto the bed, unconscious. The shadow had vanished, yet the smile remained etched upon his face, warped and unyielding, a scar carved into living flesh. Eleanor understood then. It was far too late to hope for help from the outside. What she had witnessed no longer belonged to this world. She had only one choice left, to confront the nightmare itself before it devoured the soul of her son. Outside, snow fell in heavy silence, yet within Eleanor's house the cold was sharper, crueler. That night, as the clock struck 12, the entire house shuddered as though something beneath had stirred awake. The cracks along the walls widened all at once, aligning into vast rows of teeth, opening like a monstrous jaw. From the fissures poured a grinding cacophony, relentless and deafening, the sound of something long imprisoned rising to the surface. Daniel lay motionless on the bed, his face warped by an unearthly smile that split his features wide. His breath came faint and shallow, but his eyes remained open, fixed on the dense blackness gathering in the corner of the room. Eleanor knelt beside him, clutching his icy hand. "I'm here, my son," she whispered, her voice quivering. Yet Daniel's lips only twitched with that lifeless grin, no words returning to her. Then the darkness began to move. From the fractures in the wall, a gaunt shape dragged itself forth. Its head bowed low, its arms long enough to scrape the floor. And when it lifted its face, Eleanor saw the void-wide grin, mouth split ear to ear, endless teeth clashing in a ceaseless grind that froze her blood. It was him, the bringer of smiles. Labubu. Eleanor felt her will unravel beneath its gaze. In her mind, whispers slithered, hypnotic and cruel. "Smile, and I will take your soul." Her lips trembled. Muscles tugged at her cheeks against her will. She tried to turn away, but the shadow had filled the room, its presence pressing down upon her from every corner. In the storm of her despair, Eleanor remembered the minister's journal. A single line had glimmered through the haze of dread. Only a sacrifice born of love can halt the hollow smile. She understood then. To save Daniel, she would give what no one else could. She pulled her son into her arms and lifted her gaze to the entity. "If you must take a soul, take mine," she cried, her voice rising above the grinding roar. "But let the boy go." Labubu tilted its head. Its grin widened, as though it had been waiting for this invitation since time began. It lunged forward, its maw yawning like an abyss. Eleanor shut her eyes, clutching Daniel tight, surrendering to the tide of darkness. The gnashing ceased. Silence swallowed the house. When Daniel opened his eyes, his body shook and tears burst forth. But the arms that had held him were gone. Eleanor was no longer there. On the wooden floor, at the spot where she had knelt, lay a single tooth, long, gleaming like metal, shining cold in the dim light. Daniel cried out for her, again and again, but the house gave no answer. The silence was heavy, as though nothing had ever happened at all. Yet, deep within the walls, faint and steady, a sound endured, the distant grind of unseen teeth, whispering that the hollow smile had not ended. Nen. Highway 666, the road renamed, yet the curse never left. In the endless desert night, trucks and cars vanished without a trace. Whispers speak of the hells chasing lost souls, and radios carrying the cries of the dead. Frank Harlow was no stranger to the dark. 30 years behind the wheel of an interstate rig had taught him how silence on the midnight highway could twist a man's thoughts out of shape. But tonight felt different. The fastest route to his delivery forced him through a stretch of asphalt, once marked by a name drivers still spoke in hushed tones. Highway 666. The road signs had changed, the numbers replaced, but the memories and the rumors had not. Younger drivers whispered about headlights swallowed whole by the black, about scorched tire marks etched into the pavement as though clawed there by something unseen. Some swore they had glimpsed massive dogs, eyes glowing like burning coals, sprinting alongside 18-wheelers at 70 miles per hour. No proof was ever offered. No one laughed. That night, Frank pulled out of a rest stop just shy of midnight. His cab reeked of cigarettes and stale coffee. He flicked on the radio. Only static and garbled whispers met him. With a sigh, he switched it off, leaving nothing but the steady growl of the engine and the hiss of desert wind across the windshield. The highway stretched straight and merciless, desert shadows spreading on either side, an ocean of black with no light save for his twin yellowed beams cutting ahead. Frank sipped his coffee, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Empty, yet the weight of being followed clung to him, pressing harder with every mile. A memory surfaced. Years ago, a fellow driver had vanished on this very stretch. His truck was found abandoned on the shoulder, the cab torn to pieces. Inside, nothing. No blood. No body. Just claw marks raked deep into the asphalt, trailing off into the sand. Frank shook the image away, but the deeper he drove, the heavier the air seemed, as though something unseen pressed against the glass. His headlights barely pierced a few yards ahead before the night devoured them whole. He eased back on the throttle and lit another cigarette. Through the thin veil of smoke, something flickered on the shoulder ahead, two faint red glows. They flashed, vanished, then returned. Eyes. Aye. Frank blinked hard, his heart pounding. He pressed his foot down. The speedometer climbed. The engine howled. Still, in the corner of his vision, those two red lights lingered, keeping pace with effortless calm. His hands locked white-knuckled on the wheel. Highway 666, renamed or not, had never needed a sign to mark its territory. Some places don't need names to haunt you. And Frank knew with every mile he pushed deeper that he had driven straight into its heart. Nimin. Alcohol. The clock read just past 1:00 a.m. Frank had driven more than 40 miles without passing a single pair of headlights. The desert silence seemed to swallow even the roar of his engine. He switched the radio back on, anything to drown the feeling that he was drifting into some endless black pit. At first it was only static, the familiar hiss and crackle. He reached for the dial to shut it off when something slid into the noise, a guttural growl, low and predatory, like an animal stalking unseen in the brush. Frowning, Frank twisted the tuner. The frequencies shifted, but the sound remained. Worse, it blended with something else, a voice. Help me. Frank froze. The words were faint, distorted, buried under layers of static, but unmistakable. He leaned closer to the radio, disbelieving. Then the cabin filled with overlapping cries, screams calling out names, the shriek of brakes locking, the crunch of metal twisting on impact. The truck seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the sounds. Frank gripped the wheel tighter, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For the briefest flash, he caught it, something slipping through the edge of his taillights. 4 legs, a stretched body, eyes burning red. When he looked again, the road was empty. The radio wailed with one long, piercing note, then fell silent. Frank inhaled sharply, palms damp with sweat. The old stories clawed at his mind. Drivers who swore their radios had come alive before the crash, replaying their own voices, pleading, screaming, begging. His headlights flickered. Along the right shoulder, a few dozen yards away, 2 shapes loped beside his rig. Not dogs. Not anything he had words for. Their backs rose as high as the cab's windows, their fur bristling black and gray, eyes glowing like coals whipped by wind. Frank slammed his foot down. The speedometer climbed, the wheels screamed against the asphalt, sparks bursting in his mirrors. But the shadows never fell behind. They held their distance, pacing him with effortless precision, as if toying with him. Then the radio snapped on again. A new voice emerged, rasping, frantic, gasping for breath. "They're coming. They won't stop." Frank's stomach turned to ice. He knew the voice. It was his own. The cab grew colder, desert air outside forgotten, replaced by a chill that cut to the bone. Frank's eyes locked on the endless stretch of blacktop, but his heart understood the truth. He was no longer alone on Highway 666. The clock ticked past 1 in the morning. The highway ahead devoured his headlights whole. No gas stations, no signs, no other travelers. Frank felt as though he were driving inside a loop with no exit, a stretch of road repeating itself forever. The engine's steady growl was no longer the loudest sound in the cab. From the radio came a storm of voices. Pleas for help layered over the shriek of brakes, the crunch of tearing metal, and beneath it all, a guttural growl that crawled under his skin. This time, Frank didn't reach for the dial. He knew the truth. The radio would come alive whether he wanted it to or not. In the rearview mirror, the darkness stretched, unbroken. Then, a spark of red. Eyes, another pair, and another. Within seconds, the blackness behind him glowed like a pit of embers. An entire pack was following, silent, relentless, hungry. Frank yammed his foot down. The speedometer broke past 80. The truck shuddered violently, tires screaming against the asphalt. Still, the pack did not fall behind. They fanned out on either side, massive bodies keeping pace with impossible speed. Long tongues lolled from gaping jaws, teeth flashing white and wet in the glare of his lights. One lunged. Its claws scraped the steel door with a screech that tore through Frank's skull, leaving deep gouges that glistened like open wounds. He gritted his teeth, wrestling to steady the rig. One wrong slip and the 18-wheeler would become his coffin of steel. The radio erupted again, this time with laughter. A harsh, rasping laugh, like it rose from a throat scorched in fire. Between the bursts of static and mirth, Frank heard his name, whispered, and then shouted, over and over, each time closer. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs. Sweat poured down his neck, soaking his collar. He kept his eyes locked forward, refusing to look at the glowing eyes swarming beside him. Yet they filled his mirrors, dozens of predatory glares reflecting his every move. Frank no longer needed convincing. He was prey, and the pack was closing in. Highway 666 was no highway at all. It was a ritual, a hunt in which survival was never the prize. The truck wailed in protest, tearing through the night as though it too understood the futility. And deep down, Frank knew the worst had not yet come. The chase twisted into nightmare. Frank crushed the accelerator so hard his foot trembled, yet the needle crawled forward sluggishly, as though an unseen hand were dragging the truck backward. On either side, the hellhounds skimmed the tires, claws sparking fire as they raked the asphalt. One leapt, latching onto the side of the cab, its jaws sinking into the steel as if it were paper. Frank jerked the wheel, the rig lurching violently. The beast fell away, but another replaced it instantly. Their snarls and screeches rose like a chorus, blending with the engine's tortured roar, a sound on the brink of tearing itself apart. The headlights flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. From the radio came not cries for help, but the cacophony of catastrophe. Metal folding in on itself, brakes shrieking, voices cut short in mid-scream. Frank knew every sound, every detail. They were the same noises from years ago, the night his co-workers vanished without a trace. The cab grew icy. The rearview mirror no longer reflected the road, but shimmered with a raw, blood-red glow, like flames seen through smoke. Within it, warped faces surfaced, melted, disfigured, mouths stretched open in silent screams. Frank's heart pounded violently. His grip on the wheel tore skin, blood smearing the leather. He dared not blink. Suddenly, the highway ahead erupted into light, splitting open with jagged fissures, molten seams blazing like rivers of lava. Tires tore across the cracked surface, smoke and the stench of burning rubber flooding into the cab. The pack howled in unison, a dreadful symphony that shook the desert sky. In that instant, Frank understood he was no longer driving on Earth. The highway had transformed into a vein of living fire, dragging him into its heart. The radio broke once more, its voice low and desiccated, as though the road itself had spoken. "You have arrived." Frank screamed, but his cry was devoured, swallowed by the engine's roar and the unending howl of the hounds that echoed across the wasteland. "Nine, aye?" The sky grayed with the promise of dawn, but along that stretch of highway, the light never reached. As the first pale rays broke, a husband and wife pulled their car over, unsettled by the acrid stench of something burnt still hanging in the air. In the emptiness of the road lay a scar, the asphalt scorched black, twisted into a jagged streak that seemed to writhe across the pavement. Torn shreds of rubber clung to the shoulder, a few warped fragments of steel glimmered faintly. But nothing else. No oil slick, no blood, no wreckage, only silence. The husband muttered about a truck fire in the night, but his wife shook her head, her gaze fixed on something stranger. The black scar did not fade. It spread, pulsing outward like veins beneath the skin of the highway, seeping deeper into the asphalt as though alive. From the horizon, the wind stirred, carrying not the sound of traffic nor the whisper of desert sand, but a murmur. Low, ragged whispers. Dozens of throats rasping the name of someone unseen. The wife's pulse hammered as she rolled the windows shut, while her husband started the engine, desperate to escape. Their radio crackled, country music shattering into static. A hoarse, frantic voice cut through. "They are coming. Run!" The wife froze. She knew that voice. It was not a stranger's. It was Frank Harlow, the trucker who had vanished on this highway years ago, now echoing back from the darkness. The couple sped away, leaving the ashen scar smoldering in their wake. Behind them, Highway 666 swallowed every trace, as though nothing had ever happened. Yet in the shadows, the red eyes stirred again, waiting to fasten themselves to the wheels of whoever dared wander next. The highway does not end. It only waits. Naha.